On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who've missed our earlier episode, Things That Fall from the Sky, Salia Ahava in conversation with Anu Singh Chaudhary, can watch it on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, or on Facebook on JLF Litfest. As part of JLF's Brave New World Season 1 Redux, we present our second session today, Library of Exile, Edmund de Waal in conversation with Aanchal Malhotra. Edmund de Waal, the acclaimed and award-winning author of The Hare with the Amber Eyes, is also one of the leading lights of the contemporary art scene. In conversation with Aanchal Malhotra, he talks about his current project, the Library of Exile, that he created as a space to sit and read and be. It houses more than 2,000 books in translation, unveiled to great acclaim during the Venice Biennale 2019. This porcelain-covered pavilion is intended as a place of contemplation and dialogue. It is about exile, says de Waal, what it means to have to move to another country to speak another language. Edmund de Waal is an internationally acclaimed artist and writer, best known for his large-scale installations of porcelain vessels, often created in response to collections and archives. His interventions have been made for diverse spaces worldwide, including the British Museum London, the Frick Collection New York, Ateneo Veneto Venice, the V&A Museum London, and so many other spaces. De Waal is also renowned for his best-selling family memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes and the White Road. Aanchal Malhotra is an oral historian and author of Remnants of a Separation, a history of the partition through material memory. She is the co-founder of the Museum of Material Memory and is currently working on a book about the sensorial landscape of Indian soldiers in World War I. All our sessions that have been broadcast are now available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Ladies and gentlemen, Library of Exile, Edmund de Waal in conversation with Aanchal Malhotra.
Edmund, it's so nice to see you again after so long. And since we have very little time, let's just dive straight into it. So what is the Library of Exile? And tell me about the inception of the idea as well.
Well, it's an idea that's been burning away, Aanchal, for decades with me. And it came out of two things. One was a memorializing aspect. So trying to remember all the destruction of libraries throughout history. So I wanted to absolutely kind of concretize the systematic destruction of libraries that has been happening since the beginning, since Alexandria was burned, since this whole endless, iterative destruction of places of learning that's happened throughout history. I wanted to do that, but I also wanted to make a celebratory and positive way of bringing together a literature of exile, and that's because of family, because my own family is a family in exile. But I wanted to make a space where we could be surrounded by a world of different voices, a great polyphony of different writers who've been forced to leave their countries.
I think it's, also, right, but also writers that are in self-exile as well. And those kind of memoirs and thoughts are so different from those that have been forced out of their country. I've been following your work for years. You're a visual artist, ceramicist, everyone knows that. But you also call yourself an artist who writes. And this is the very first project where you've actually involved words. And it's a lot less minimalist, although when you look at it, it still looks fairly minimalist, but it has a lot of layers and texture to it. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask you why language is so important, particularly when language is taken from you.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I am an artist who writes, or a potter who writes, or a writer who pots. I have no idea who I am anymore at all, except that there are two things which are absolutely basic to being a human being. And one is the vessels that we hold, that we pick up, that we use. They're absolutely quotidian. They're part of our everyday life. They're part of human culture, and how we use those vessels, how we pass them on. Material culture is what we share, and we can talk for hours about that, Aanchal. But the other thing, of course, is song, is the beginning of language, which we hold very closely with us from the first moments that we hear our mothers in this world. And so we grow up with language absolutely as part of our living and breathing. And what it is to be separated from the place of language, and have that taken away from us by force, because of our religious beliefs, because of our political beliefs, because of gender, because of seismic political upheaval. I mean, your great, wonderful, extraordinary book on partition anatomizes that for us. And to feel exile, to have a sense of somewhere else, where language belongs, where your heart belongs, where your family belongs, that sense of otherness seems to me something which defines us as human beings, that sense of the otherness of where we should be but cannot be now. So two things, making things and writing about them.
I remember, I think we had this conversation when we met as well, how during the partition so many languages were lost when people crossed over the borders. And someone said to me in an interview once, when you don't have any connection to your land, language is one of the first things that disappears. You know, it's so intangible. So as a result, many languages in the subcontinent, if they haven't been passed down by generations, they're really dissolving, they're disappearing. But you have collected these languages in this beautiful space in the British Museum, but your exhibition is a traveling one, and it hits very certain, very particular cities that have almost heartbreaking and sometimes grotesque migration histories attached to them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's a migrant library. It's a traveling library, as all libraries really should. So I began it in Venice, which is, of course, the great city of translation, the great city where all, after the Renaissance, where all these different languages came into powerful translation of each other. So it began there, and also it was connected there to the ghetto, to the Jewish ghetto, and that was a very important part of its genesis. So it began during the Venice Biennale there last summer, and then it traveled in the winter to Dresden. And Dresden, great city in Germany, which of course was destroyed in the Second World War by British bombing. And there I housed it in one of the great palaces of Dresden, which was bombed by the British, and where one of the great libraries was destroyed. And then its third place of respite, of refuge, is the British Museum, surrounded, of course, by this culture of artifacts in exile, these great history of transient objects. And so that's where it is at the moment. Of course, in exile, it's locked down. No one could go and see my library, but you can go and see it online. There are lots of ways of connecting to it and reading the books, the thousands of books that there are. My catalogue is there online. You can go and delve into this great world literature. But it has one, if I'm allowed, one final place. And after the British Museum, then the whole library is being donated to Mosul in Iraq, which was one of the great university libraries, which was destroyed by ISIS 5 years ago. They're rebuilding it, and so the great library, on it goes and ends up in Iraq.
I think that's fascinating. It's so poignant, you know. Obviously, Venice and the ghetto is also deeply connected to Jewish history, which is something you venture into quite a bit in all of your work, I think, including, of course, the Hare, but also your book about porcelain. You know, it travels so many different places. How did you end up choosing the books? How did you become acquainted with the authors and their stories?
So
His voice is so powerful.
The DNA of the library was that I just looked at my own library and realized that I had hundreds of books that were written by people who'd been forced into exile, including obviously my own family. So that was the DNA of it. But then I realized that I started talking to people, including you, for advice. And so what I started to gather were through writer friends, suggestions for books, suggestions for this literature. And it goes all the way back to Ovid 2,000 years ago, and right the way through to writers who are publishing now in exile. So enormous support from the literary world. But then there's a very beautiful idea happened where in Venice and all these different places, I said to people, there was a great notice saying, if you find that there is a book that you need to have in this library, let me know and I'll buy it. Hugely expensive thing to say. But so I've been buying books people have been suggesting. And it's been beautiful because it's a way. I mean, libraries are gorgeous places of suggestion and conversation. They're noisy places, rightly so.
But I think one of the things that really struck me, and maybe this is because I'm from India, is that there are so many regional languages that we have here. And every day, so many of them are getting lost. But still, I think there is something very unique about literature that comes from one's mother tongue.
Yes.
And there is something also untranslatable about that. And particularly if you are in exile, there's a very poignant story that is attached to it. I know Sasha, Alexander Herman is also in the library, and his work is something that I have followed for years. And your own grandmother is in the library as well.
Yes, I mean, you know, my grandmother, my family story is that they were a Jewish family who ended up in Vienna and had an extraordinary library that was looted by the Nazis. And so my father and my grandmother, my great grandfather became refugees. And so with no books at all. And then after the war, my grandmother as a writer wrote brilliantly and powerfully about exile, and wrote about the difficulty of going home and the necessity to recreate in language that lost experience of home. So it's something that goes very deep I think for all of us. And at the moment, I mean, as we all are atomized and locked into exile, we can't talk to each other except this way. We can't see each other. We can't buy books. It's very difficult to get our hands on books. It's very significant how we reach into our memories of libraries. We reach back into this connection with what books have been given to us, have been passed on, have been suggested, and then we pass them on ourselves. And so I know I'm going on, Aanchal, but each book, absolutely critical, each book in the library, when you open it up, it has Ex Libris, Library of Exile, an Ex Libris plate in it. And if the book matters to you, you write your name. And so there are books in this library where hundreds of people over the last year have written their name, and you just get one name after another after another. And so it's a way of inscribing ourselves into the books that matter. It's cool. It's very cool. It matters.
And I think sometimes it's all about also the language we don't understand, but the theme. There are so many similar themes when it comes to displacement and migration, no matter where you are in the world. There is something so almost prophetic and understandable by everyone. And I think I'm thinking also about oral history, which is something that you're also concerned about a lot, and how these stories vocally passed and orally passed on generations often end up in mother tongue languages, like languages that are not English. And a certain way, I think there's a certain way to talk about loss and to talk about belonging in your mother tongue, which perhaps doesn't translate as well in English sometimes. So I also love the idea of people inscribing their names into books they might not be able to read.
It's a lovely idea. It's absolutely. It's very poignant. It's very.
Yeah. And I was thinking I was going through on the British Museum, the link to the library, and I was thinking about your great-grandfather and his library that was seized from him in 1938, and he never got it back, right? And as people move from place to place, they lose libraries as well. So I think, to cut a very haphazard thought short, the word refugee is still very much a used word in our vocabulary today, and refugee narratives are still very much things that people actively think about and write about. Can you speak to the relevance of such a library in today's age, and also particularly the fact that we're all exiled from each other right now?
Well, what we see, we've been seeing it in India for the last month, is this extraordinary, I won't say biblical, because that's my reference here. Movements of people, and over the last decade, we've been so conscious of population movements, of refugees, of migration, and what we see time and time again is this toxic language, this policing of borders, this endless stigmatizing of people who are on the move, who are moving for all kinds of reasons. But I want to turn it on its head. I want you to sit in the library and look round at this literature which has given us so much, all of which, this world culture which depends on people moving. It depends on people crossing a border. It depends on people bringing a language and reinvigorating, revivifying the culture they move to. It depends on this gift, which it is that someone who comes from somewhere else gives you, the gift of somewhere else. And so actually, speaking as the child of a refugee who would only be here, if a border was open for our family, I want to sort of talk about value and respect for refugees, and value and respect for the literature of exile. So for me, it's a hugely personal, it's a kind of, to be honest, Aanchal, this is the kind of project it's the most complicated project I've ever done, but in some ways it's the simplest. It's absolutely the simplest. The heart of it, the feeling of it is very pure, actually.
No, it comes across as something that is full of pathos.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you cannot get away from the object or the artifact. That is very much tied into your practice. So tell us, in Dresden, you added another element to the installation, right? Yeah.
So there Dresden is the place where porcelain began in Europe, Meissen porcelain, 18th century. And I bought an extraordinary dinner service of 18th century porcelain that had been looted from a Jewish family in 1938, stolen by the Nazis. And during the firebombing, the destruction of Dresden, this beautiful dinner service of birds, insects, and flowers had been destroyed. So they were just fragments, these shards. I bought these, and with a great Japanese artist, we pieced them back together again using gold, this wonderful Japanese technique called kintsugi, where you mend using gold. And I showed them again in Dresden. And it's a beautiful image. You must go, if you look on my website, you can see these plates. It's a really beautiful image, Aanchal. It's a way of showing damaged objects and showing the history of them. It's not about restoring them and and making them perfect. It's about showing the history of an object. It's basically about storytelling. It's basically about storytelling through objects, which is kind of what we care about. We both care about.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have questions from the audience.
Yes.
Shall I go ahead? Okay, Arun G asks about languages that are no longer used or translations are difficult. How does one deal with works like this?
Well, my goodness. I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because actually translation, you know, we need translation more than ever before. And at every point in this progress of my library through the world, we've done workshops with around translation, working with poets and translators to kind of emphasize the fact that all literature is dialogue. All literature is dialogic. It's a conversation between a reader and writer, translator and text. What I think this particular question addresses as well is again your thing about the lost languages, about needing to keep translation going, keep alive, the vigor of language alive. It's something that we need to care about profoundly. Much more of this.
Yes, but I think one of the beautiful things about the Library of Exile is that the fact that it has books from all languages.
Well,
it's not.
Well, after this,
Yes, go ahead.
We've only got 90 languages, I think. We need many, many more. We've got 100 more languages to go. So after this, I'm sure the suggestions will pour in.
And actually, the next question is, it fits so perfectly. Nakul asks, does the project also involve translations of the books you have collected over the years?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, I mean, there are some particular writers who are represented in 20 languages, and others who are just in a couple of languages. This is a project which will keep going and growing. It's no longer mine. I have to say, this is a project which is entirely about people's response, people suggesting ideas, people pointing out languages and that haven't been represented, or countries even that haven't been represented. And online, there's a Library of Exile catalog where you can email the librarian of the Library of Exile and suggest books, and we will respond. It may take a while, but we will buy and respond. Please do.
So it's an evolving library as well.
It's evolving, absolutely.
Okay, the next question is actually very complimentary for you. Sachdev Ramakrishna asks, Mr. De Waal, aren't you a great potter who writes visually? We'll look at your books, and then he's listed your books and said, all beautiful.
Thank you. Oh my God, that's a nice thing to hear in lockdown. So,
but the next question addresses a very pertinent issue. Ajoy Sudani asks, there is a pressure to move to digital books and digital libraries on our mobiles. What do you think about that?
Oh God, I need books. I need physical books. You know, I absolutely understand. You know, I mean, here we are, blissfully being able to talk digitally and respond, all this kind of thing. It's an extraordinary wealth there. But I'm a maker. I'm a writer. I write longhand, you know, with a pen. I need paper, but also I need. And what's so beautiful about being in this library, and I invite you to come and be in it, is that when you pick a book up and feel the book, and open it up and see that book plate in it, and see the inscription of one person writing again and again and again, name after name after name, you understand that the book as an artifact is a hugely powerful thing. And we need objects to continue in the world. So books need to keep being published as things.
I also think the book is a cultural artifact as well, depending on what language. I mean, sometimes when I look at books from the Far East or even books of Urdu and Arabic, they have for me, because I can't read the language, this beautiful calligraphic quality almost. And it really does become an artifact of beauty.
Completely. I mean, you know, where I'm looking at you, you have thousands of books behind you. If we were in a different part of my studio, I have a library with 3,000 books just over there, you know, up to the left. Yes.
Yes. Yes, and there's such a sense of comfort. I mean, I don't know whether I immediately resonate with your project because I come from a book-selling family, and it means something to be in the presence of the written word. And I understand that it's easy for us to download things on our mobiles, but I mean, there is a joy in books. There is a warmth in holding something. I remember where I read books. If the story stays with me, I remember where I was reading your book. In fact, I remember places that I've sat in with the book.
Well, they go back a very long way, and I in the British Museum, I've been, you know, with these clay tablets from Ashurbanipal, you know, from Assyrian, you know, and there I am, clay and words coming together 3,000 years ago, and they will continue. I promise you that.
Yeah. Oh, William has a lovely comment. He says, when we planned this session, I had no idea that Aanchal and Edmund were already in contact, but of course they would be. It's a perfect meeting of neighboring worlds.
Hello, William. I'm very nice to meet you. It's a very nice guy.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Are there any books that you would recommend to our readers from the library? Anything that maybe you discovered that was new to you?
Well, yes. So, Hamid Ismailov, Uzbeki, extraordinary writer of Strangers and Bees, an Uzbek writer in exile, wonderful, powerful, beautiful. Someone I didn't know, to my shame, Al-Azawi, the great Iraqi writer, whose novels are absolutely wonderful. The Traveller and the Innkeeper, a book about a secret policeman, extraordinary literature here. And then this is something I've known and loved, but this is my go-to. I'm sorry, I hand this over to you. A great Romanian poet who wrote in German called Celan, C-E-L-A-N, Paul Celan, whose poems are absolutely heartbreaking. His parents died in the Holocaust. He wrote in German, beautifully translated into English and French and many, many other languages. But Celan, this is the name of, this is the poet of exile, amongst many other poets of exile.
Okay.
You know, so, and you know, you can't go wrong with Ovid, you know,
Right.
Tristia, his poems of exile 2,000 years ago. So, we
I
only
read somewhere that you also have the entire collected works of Freud.
Yes, Freud. Freud is behind me, actually, over there, surrounded by Freud. But you know what? Your book's pretty good. I mean, come on, let's do some recommendations here.
We have 5 minutes to the end of our session. There's one more question.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a suggestion.
Okay.
It might be interesting to have the books in your Library of Exile recorded as audio in the language of origin to keep the sound of the language alive.
I love that. I love that.
Beautiful.
What a beautiful.
Ramona Gallardi says that. Yeah, that is beautiful.
Well, we did a wonderful thing in Venice, a late night poetry session when we had people read poems in the languages, their home languages, and we had 30 different languages being read. So perhaps when I come to Jaipur for the non-digital thing, we could have people read poems in as many languages as possible. It's a good late night thing to do, poems at night.
Yes, I think that would be beautiful. I mean, in India, we have languages we have never even heard of. I apparently, during my research, conducted an interview with someone in Pakistan in a language I didn't know I spoke. But it was just a mixing of 2 other languages that I spoke. So I think it's, yes, very powerful words. And Oh, there's one more question. Will there be a construction project in Mosul and the building of a library to house the books?
Yes. So at the moment, you know, they're rebuilding with UNESCO's help. They're rebuilding this university library. It reopens next year, and then my library is shipped there. And God willing, I'll be able to go to Iraq and open the Library of Exile in a place of exile. I mean, it's in a place. We remember these libraries throughout history being destroyed, but all we can do is to do something positive and generative and make a new library. You know, it's the only responsibility I have.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There is another question about insight into why libraries were destroyed.
So I've written about this on my website, and so what I do is a history of all the different ways that libraries were destroyed, both by rulers, by holy men, lots of madrasa libraries, lots of rabbinical libraries, lots of book burnings. Great Buddhist libraries, of course, destroyed in India, 11th century, all the way through to the destructions of the 20th century, you know, from Sarajevo all the way through Tripoli down to Mosul. So there are many reasons why libraries are destroyed, but you can be absolutely sure that people in power are frightened by the extraordinary, wonderful richness and generative qualities of libraries. Libraries are dangerous places, full of voices, full of differing opinions, full of language, full of polyphony, full of different opinions and ideas. And so people who are frightened by dissent burn books. They always have, and they always will. It's a dreadful truth.
I think it's a very resonant thought. It's happening even today across the world.
There's on the walls of my Library of Exile written is the words of Heinrich Heine, a great German poet 200 years ago, where he said, this is 200 years ago, Aanchal, where they burn books, then they will burn humans. And it's I'm afraid to say that's it's a prescient thing to record.
There is a question about the poets in your Library of Exile, but I think that we can see your entire catalog online, right?
You can look at it, read it, and then tell me what I'm missing.
Oh yes, that's wonderful. Yes, so you are still taking suggestions for the library.
We are absolutely taking suggestions. Yes.
Excellent. Do you see the need for libraries moving from the physical entity to other mediums to make it more available for a larger audience? I think we've answered that question already.
We do. Yeah, absolutely. We have to be aware of that. Absolutely.
Okay, I am being told that this is the end of our session. And I guess...
Yes.
I know, it was wonderful to see you again.
It's lovely to see.
And the funny thing is that... yes, we would have met in London at the end of the month had life not happened the way it did. But it's really nice to see you like this as well. And for everyone who's listening, I hope they manage to catch the Library of Exile somewhere.
Well, my very best. It's been a complete privilege to be part of this. My very best to you and the family, and to everyone else who's watching in lockdown. And
thank you, Edmund de Waal. Thank you so much, Aanchal, for that fabulous conversation. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please do remember to log back on Friday, the 4th of September, for a set of new episodes. We have Strange Flowers, Donald Ryan in conversation with Kaveri Madhavan. Irish author Donald Ryan explores the muses, methods, and inspirations behind his latest work, Strange Flowers, a story that paints the beautiful and devastating life of despairing parents, their missing daughters, and what or who she brings with her upon her astonishing return. This session will be presented in partnership with the European Union and the European Union Prize for Literature, and will be at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second session on Friday, the 4th of September, will be present tense from the battlefront, Ambarish Satwik and Arunava Sinha in conversation. Even as the medical establishment battles the virus, there are rifts and contradictions within. Vascular surgeon and writer Ambarish Satwik speaks with literary translator Arunava Sinha about the terrors of the pandemic across the perspectives of history and literature, as well as in the present tense. This will be at 8:30 p.m. IST, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. See you then.